Welcome and thank you for tuning in to Cryptids, Creeps, and Conspiracy. The following content may involve explicit language and materials, so listener discretion is advised. Welcome back, everyone. It's me, the usual. I'm sure you've heard this a million times. I'm super excited. We have a brand new, hot off the press guest, never been seen on my pod before, and it is Miss Melissa Kim Corter. And she is a depth psychologist and author. I was trying to snoop around and figure out which books were yours, but I didn't want to pick the wrong one by mistake. So I just left it at that. I usually want to open the floor up at the beginning, and I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Tell us what the hell is a depth psychologist, for starters, because it sounds really freaking awesome. And just a little bit about what you do, why you do it, anything that you want to have out there. The floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here. Depth psychology, it's an interesting field. To be honest with you, I didn't even know what I was getting roped into until I took the plunge and was like, let's see what this is all about. So essentially, depth psychology is one of the many traditions of psychology that likes to include this part of the psyche that's called the unconscious. So it believes essentially that there's a deeper hidden part to us, and part of the depth is learning how to see things symbolically, learning how to explore the shadow side of the personality, the dark side of the personality, and to find value in that, essentially, instead of fearing it or writing it off as some spiritual or personal development kind of thing where we go into the subconscious. It's more of what's going on in there, what symbolic forms, what compulsions, what darker elements are happening within all of us so that we can have some respect for that part instead of denying its existence. Yeah. That's my version of explanation.
You would have a field day with me. Just let me tell you. And what's so awesome is a lot of times for me personally, there's a lot of weird shit that happens to me that my brain can do that I can't explain. And I don't even know how to even try to explain. I've had other people like tag me with names and stuff. It's, oh, you might be this, that, or the other. And I look it up and I'm like, that's not, yes, but I'm like, there's all this other stuff. All these things that would be individually put together, my brain just compacts them all into one. I'm basically a freak of nature unicorn, like a magic 8-ball sometimes, and it's rather inconvenient, but I've never understood it. And I've always been like, man, I want someone to ask. I need to find somebody who understands, because it's very hard to try to ask questions and get answers from people that their only answer to the weird shit that I see, hear, feel, and do is, oh, maybe you're like schizophrenic or something like that. No, I've actually been tested and I know that part is not the case. And they're like, maybe you're this, that, or the other. I'm like, I don't know, because I've never met another me that can explain what's happening. Because a lot of people, even though we are a little more open nowadays than obviously we used to be, for sure, I'd straight up be in a loony bin if it was like the 40s. And people just don't want to talk about it because they feel like you get labeled with the sticker of she's crazy or she's weird or she's just the town nut job or whatever. And I don't give a shit. Now, I don't claim to be anything in particular. I just say, I don't know what's wrong with me, but here's what I can do. And I don't know what to do with it. So I'm super excited. Can you tell us a little bit? So you've got your author stuff. What kind of works have you written?
Oh, I love it. So I love to tackle all of the things that other people tend to be afraid of.
Yeah.
So, the paranormal, true crime. I like to summarize it and say that a lot of my writing and my work revolves around film, fairy tales, and forensics. They're very unique, but also there's a lot of similarity, overlap. And they can tell us things about the condition and state of our psyche. And I love what you just shared, because this is the common thing that I experience from most of the people I work with, or just even the people I have conversations with on a regular basis. which is I have this weird thing or series of weird things.
Mhm.
I have this thing about me that other people can't relate to or maybe understand, or maybe they're just flat out afraid and distance themselves.
Yeah.
So these layers to us that feel like home and are natural to the ones that are living with these parts of us. But to
Mhm.
people who aren't as comfortable sinking into the surface of who they are, authenticity, that they're skimming the surface of life. And I don't mean this in a negative sense. Sometimes that is a trauma response in itself or a
Yeah.
comfort zone, but they tend to rarely have these more like soulful types of questions like,
Yeah.
what is this about? If I were to remove the label, if I were to see this through a different lens, maybe this is a gift, a skill, a talent versus a burden or a curse. And maybe I just haven't learned yet how to harness that. And not in a hokey, weird way of I'm not just going to hang up my shingle and say, oh, I'm a psychic medium now. Not that I bash any of that because I've done that too, but to really open our eyes to the multiple ways to experience things that make us uncomfortable. That what I say is like that the things that frighten and fascinate us. It's one of the
Yeah.
reasons we go see psychological thrillers or horror movies.
No, not me.
It's well, I do.
That's particularly why I avoid them.
Yeah.
A lot of them make me very uncomfortable because I don't like that something that is portrayed so evil and so crazy and so just negative. Me and my husband sometimes will watch a movie and I'm like, I get it. I 100% relate to this character. And that makes me nervous because they're talking about this person like they are a monster. The things that they can do make them evil. And
That's
I'm
right.
like, I didn't ask for this. I have tried to not do this. It's a curse. And sometimes I do tell people, I'm like, I wish I knew someone who could help me get control of it. Because like right now, like I said, the things that happen, I don't look for it. I don't antagonize it. I don't do anything because I don't know. I don't know how to filter it. But I'm like, man, if I could find a way to control what I can do, I could do so much good for people.
Yes.
I'm like, but I don't know. It just comes at me whenever it feels like it. And it scares this. Hey, someone is going to die in 24 hours. Have fun.
Right.
See ya. And I'm like, but what do I do with that?
Yes. Oh, I love this. I don't love this. I relate. I understand the torment of it. It's a simultaneous gift and curse feeling or burden, like I was talking
Mhm.
about. That's what started my entire career path was that same exact dynamic. As a small child, I was just talking to somebody else about this, but as a small child, one of my favorite games always involved making other people uncomfortable.
Yes.
But what we do is we lived in
Healthy.
this interesting space where there was a ton of woods and land around our home.
Yep.
We were the last house on the street. And so one of the things I would do is go outside and I'd wander and I would just play games and things. But the creepy game that I would play is I would dig and I would constantly be digging and I would pretend I was a detective and I was hell bent on finding a dead body. And I was like maybe 6, 7 years old playing this game, right? So it was a little off putting to some of the neighborhood kids and family members and stuff.
Where were you when I was that age?
My besties.
You walk into the woods and it's just, I don't know how to explain it other than, and I'm sure there's people out there that totally 100% will understand what we're saying. You walk into the woods and sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes you're just walking in the woods and whatever. But sometimes you walk in the woods and you can feel like it's ominous, right? There is something here that has not been seen either by choice or that nobody else has been able to know that it was there. It's almost like something instinctive in your brain where most people would feel uncomfortable and scared, they run.
Yes.
We get this almost a familiar type energy kind of thing, or you can tell that whatever it is that hasn't been seen ever or in forever wants you to find it. And so you seek it out partially because that feeling you have is never going to go away in that area until you find what it is that wants you to find it.
Yes.
Like it's calling to you, even though nobody else can hear it.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
like a magnetic pull, or sometimes you're conscious of it. Sometimes you're not conscious, but there is this pull. So I would follow that. And one day when I was about 14 years old, my mother sat me down. I had started getting into drugs and alcohol and hanging out with the not most. And so she was really worried about me. And we were having these deeper conversations. And she tells me that in this area, it was known for really creepy, weird things. And essentially, there was a serial killer who they had found body parts in the region around this stretch of road. And immediately I was brought back to being a child and digging and looking for bodies. So here she's thinking she's going to blow my mind telling me this story and I'm going to be scared and I'm going to be, instead I'm like intrigued. Wait a minute. What?
Funny story, Mom.
Right? What was that? And then she says, not only was he notorious in that area for all of the places where people were found, but also that her best friend's brother was one of the victims. So there was this bizarre connection between this individual in these weird ways. And so that house, we had the most weird occurrences happen growing up in that house. But I seemed to be one of the only ones in the house that saw things, sensed things, felt them, dreamed about them, was haunted by them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we didn't have, at this time, I make myself sound so old when I say this, but there weren't cell phones or things like that at the time. So when I was growing up, what would happen is there was like 30 miles of stretch of road after our house before crossing the border from New Jersey into New York. And that was a long stretch of road. Some of it was dirt road at the time. And what would happen is anytime there was an accident or something like that, what do? If they don't have a cell phone, they're going to walk and they're going to go to the nearest home to try to get help. That was us. So I would have people come to the front door on numerous occasions covered in blood and glass cut up from accidents, from all these things. The whole entire thing, I started to feel like, okay, is it the house or is it the land? Is it me? Because there's this sort of thing that happens when you're someone like that, as you are.
Yep.
You tend to attract bizarre circumstances and events. And there's also this strange thing that occurs where on some level you're safe because you're an observer of it, but at the same time you hate it because you're still seeing the worst, most difficult parts of life, death, murder.
You feel it all.
Yes.
Whether it is yours or not, you feel it all.
That's
and
right.
I think I just found my soul sister here. I think we've obviously cut from the same cloth or something. And I 1000% agree to that. So I refer to it as, I tell everybody I'm a beacon. I'm like a lighthouse for anything, basically anything supernatural or paranormal. It seems like it happens. I literally have been taken on ghost hunts just because they knew if I was there, if there was anything going to happen, it would happen when I was there. And I could tell them because sometimes people do get a little skeptical. Some people do it because they love it and they believe in everything. Some people do it because they're like, there's no way in hell this place is actually haunted. This shit doesn't happen. So they bring me and they're like, hey, because they know that I could walk in a room and be like, nope, nothing here. Don't even waste your time. There's nothing in here. Moving on. And literally I have been used as like a Geiger counter. I was like, I am not sure what's going on. And then come to find out on that cell block, I found the cell where the cellmate actually murdered his cellmate. And the guy was like, are you sure you want this one? I was like, I'm telling you, there's something going on in this room. I was like, I don't know what the hell it is. I was like, there's something in here. And then they sent me in there. I was like, why are you doing this to me? But I just want to take a real quick pause here because I'm getting a kick out of this. So starters, those of you who are not on the Patreon feed, go check it out. There is, by the way, there's like a 7-day trial period for all of the tiers in my Patreon. So that includes the video ones. And we discovered before we started recording that apparently I'm pink today. I am like Oompa Loompa, but pink. And if I put my hands up in the air like I am frozen, I don't want you to shoot me, I turn normal. But when I put them down, I turn pink. And this whole time you've been talking, I'm like, man, your chair. We need to get you in this like a black leather kind of Morticia type dress. We need to do your hair and your makeup. And you need to pose in that chair because that chair looks dope.
It's on its way. The whole thing's happening. It's all set up as we know it. And this chair arrived like a couple weeks ago. So
Like, I'm just looking at it, and that's all I'm seeing is you like doing the pose, like, yeah, that's right, bitches. I don't know why that's all I'm thinking about right now, but that's what I got.
This thing goes 2 feet above my head. I can't even touch the top if I put my arm up. It's crazy.
I want. Right now, I'm excited though because I have my little wheelie chair. It's got a little footrest and it like vibrates and stuff. So I have a pretty high class chair. I usually do this at the beginning, and I forgot. Just so you're aware, also over here by this candle, right here by the blue puppy, and down here by this really old, been in the family for God knows how long bunny rabbit, are my cat ball sensors. I turned them all on when I came in, but I did not let them know. So if anything wants to come visit and hang out, feel free. Please hit the sensors and let us know you're here. I just never gave. Last night I told them they had to stop and stay out in the studio, so I never invited them to come back and play with the sensor. So that is acceptable. So anybody who wants to come in and hit a sensor, feel free. Okay, now I am feeling almost like you would understand what I'm saying sometimes. So when we watch crime shows or movies or whatnot, I have a very skeptical husband. On one hand, he doesn't flat out mock me or anything, bless his heart. I think it's because he's actually finally seen enough evidence that I can actually do what I'm saying I can do or things like that. So he's not bad like that, but he a lot of times just thinks that it's just weird coincidence that happens like all the time. Yeah, he would make a horrible detective. And sometimes when I am watching something similar genre-wise as to what you're talking about earlier, I've noticed that I generally have a curiosity and maybe some viewpoints. A lot of times I come up with the most, some people think it's like super crazy, different ideas, but to me, they make sense. Or I at least pose the question because to me, I like to get behind the why. And some people are like, oh, this person's off. I'm like, but consider, look how they grew up. Look how they were treated. Look at what's going on with them. Maybe there's, like, I just did an episode with Bill. Oh my gosh, I can never get the freaking words right. It's CKCB, like crimes, killers, cults, and beer, I think. Or cults comes first. I don't know. And I can't ever get the C's right. But anyway, he's awesome. I love him. He's great. And we just did an episode that comes out later this week. Actually, I think it came out today, maybe. And we were discussing this serial killer. You had said the serial killer happened in Florida and all this stuff. And I was like, he's don't understand why he would have killed this person. I was like, think about it, though. It might have been as simple as a combination of words that woman said to him that triggered him. And he's, oh, I didn't think about that. I was like, exactly. I was like, and because he was a guy that he would pick up prostitutes or sex, whatever. It's my show, whatever. I'm sorry if it hurt your feelings. That's just what I was raised with. So they're prostitutes. And he would pick them up. And a lot of times, a lot of them got away. He'd pick them up. He'd do whatever. And then he would just drop them and leave. But then every now and then he would get one where he would pick them up, do the thing. He'd drop them off. But then he would go back for something about them. He would go back. They'd see each other a few dates or whatever they call it. And then something would happen. And those are the ones that he killed. And he's not understand why he didn't kill all of them. And I'm like, think about it. If he's going back more than once in his mind, there is now a relationship in some fucked up form in his head. And if she shows any disinterest at all, that is them. Like totally just basically like your girlfriend cheating on you kind of thing, even though they have no relation. She's a sex worker, whatever. And I was like, it's just the concept of the moment you put that relationship, I was like, it doesn't have to be mutual. Just put the relationship there in his head. Then anything she says or does could jeopardize that to him.
That's right.
And he just, to me, it is a lot of, because he's like, why didn't he? I'm like, maybe he didn't know. Maybe it was strictly, literally his subconscious that was just something would just eat him. Just pull a trigger, hit a button, and everything, all the rage would bubble. I was like, we don't know. Maybe it's Mentos in a Coke bottle kind of situation. And he doesn't know what the Mentos is, so he doesn't know to avoid it. And I feel like that's a lot with, especially anybody out there who suffers from any type of mental illness. I know that it's been an issue for me. And there are certain things that I intentionally avoid because after a couple times of going into a situation, something hits the button when I can't respond well. I figured out, I need to avoid that. I need to avoid that type of music or that particular song, or don't watch this movie or whatever it is. Don't go to this location. And I avoid it because I figured out that is a trigger for me. So I know to avoid it. But some people, I also am medicated now, so everything's a little easier. Highly recommend, if you have any mental health issues, get help. Everybody just is afraid that they're going to be called this or they're getting institutionalized. If you knew half the crap that I said to my psychologist and I've never been institutionalized, trust me, you're fine. Like, you're fine. P.S. There's a resource tab on my website. It's www.cryptidscreepsandconspiracy.com, and there's a whole page. There's domestic violence hotline. There's a suicide hotline. There's all kinds of resources on there that I want to make sure that you guys know about. But that being said, I'm curious, as far as like education and training, is it similar to a regular psychologist, or how does that work?
First of all, it's hard for me to answer that question because my education and training has come in so many different forms before I even got to the phase of my life where I went back to school for a doctorate. So it's layered with everything you're speaking to. Some of our education and training comes through being exposed to situations in life and learning about them and processing them. So I had a whole series of things occur, like some of the things you're speaking to, plus different training, certifications, all of that layered throughout. I'm also a clinical certified hypnotherapist. I also worked with an elder for years who was a shaman, and she taught me different things, and I worked with her and learned from her. So altered states of consciousness and being able to see, sense, and feel and use intuition as a resource instead of a gimmicky like trick, right?
Yeah.
So all of that was already embedded in who I was before I found depth psychology. So depth psychology does speak to some of the things that we're talking about, where it does include the unconscious part of the mind. And it also can speak to compulsions. It can help us understand that there is this shadow part of us that we all have. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily good or bad. It's, in fact, that's what the bigger part of all of that work is, helping us understand the framework of the psyche so we can catch ourselves and recognize when the ego is the dominating factor in our viewpoint, in our perspectives. When we have the ego fully engaged, which we want, by the way, we need the ego. It helps us have a sense of I and boundaries. So you being able to be as sensitive as you are, without some type of healthy ego at play, you wouldn't be able to know how you feel independent of the experiences, the intuition, the things that other people may not see, sense, or feel. Without that sense of I and ego, that would be a blurred line, and it wouldn't feel so intense or amplified or energetic. There's a charge to those things that we feel when the ego is intact. When the ego is very fragile, we cling to ideas of duality. We need things to be good or bad. We need things to be right or wrong. We need to watch a documentary, a case, a situation, and we actually unconsciously need to be able to figure this out logically. But you and I know, in the realm of things, logic is not necessarily what fed those behaviors, emotional decisions. And when we don't have a healthy sense of ego, we can also collapse within ourselves, which means that we are actually closer to the elements of the unconscious running our lives, which means people will literalize their fantasies. They will act on their compulsions.
Hey guys, I'm Jerry Pauly, and my wife and I host a little podcast called Hillbilly Horror Stories. Sure, we aren't as popular as some of the ghost hunting TV shows out there, but we also don't go running out of the room screaming like a little bitch when we do see a ghost. So there's that. You know who you are. So if you want some good history and storytelling with just the right amount of humor and plenty of paranormal activity, then we have just what you're looking for. We've got over 30 million downloads, so somebody must like us, and trust me, we don't have that many friends. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts.
Without knowing they're doing this. So it's also, I'm not trying to say people shouldn't be held accountable at all. That's not where I'm saying, or what I'm saying. It's more of this idea that our black and white thinking keeps us blind to the huge potential available to us to start understanding human behavior through a different lens. It's everything you're saying, triggers being activated. We don't know sometimes if someone does what they do because there's just the right ingredients present. That person isn't trying to actually kill someone. They're trying to kill off something that is cycling through their nervous system.
Yeah.
Unfinished business, right? Some unhealed trauma, whatever it might be. So depth psychology would take this kind of a really big subject and say, we don't know it all. We need to leave room for ambiguity, which means to get out of that dualistic thinking that says it has to be this or it has to be this, because sometimes it's in the middle. Or sometimes it's ominous, right? It's obscure and might have qualities of synchronistic elements that come in. And this is really tricky for us because people want to feel safe. And ambiguity means they're not. It means, wait a minute, I want to watch this true crime thing or this movie or this whatever. I want to be able to separate myself from what I perceive as a monster. I want to be able to say, you're bad, I'm good, and feel better about myself.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. So those of us like you and myself that do this work differently, we get that on a fundamental level. In fact, there's things within us because of our unique experiences that make us align in a sense where we can see through those illusions, pick up those patterns, and understand why people would go off the rails, which is part of what we're talking about earlier, that seeker sort of sense, that feeling, that pull of, I don't want to glorify this person's shitty behavior. Excuse my language. It's
we don't have a language problem on this show.
Okay, cool. I just want to understand, right? I want to know why. It's because we have a little bit of that in us too, that we're trying to reconcile in our own way. I'm not calling us all serial killers for sure or anything like that.
So I'm laughing here because your whole description that you just were talking about the ego stuff, I'm like, oh my God, you just explained my entire life. That is me. But it's weird. So instinctively and how I was raised, that is who I am. I need the black and white. I need to know. I need to figure. I need all that. That's just how my brain wants it to go.
Yes.
But my body is getting all this other stuff. And it's very difficult for me because I feel so much of everyone else. I'll go ahead and do a disclaimer out here. I'm bipolar. I have ADHD and apparently a little splash of borderline personality disorder. So which is funny because I tell people all the time, I was like, for somebody who feels nothing, I feel too much. But it's that I feel too much of everyone else, but I don't have emotion a lot of time. And it makes it very difficult because especially if you're wanting to assess a situation or make a decision or something like that, it's very hard because I sometimes get to where it's almost, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I feel nothing. If I didn't feel everyone else's feelings, I probably wouldn't feel anything at all. I'm just like empty. And with some of my medicines, we've been trying to figure out this whole like emotional thing with the bipolar stuff. And there's been a couple where I've taken them and literally everybody's, because I am very energetic and I've always been that way. I've always been the super crazy, bouncing off the walls, hyper, very into everything. And when I took some of these medicines, it was literally like I was a zombie. I was functioning and everything, but I felt good or bad, nothing. It was literally like I would just sit there and I'd tell like my husband, I'm like, this is really weird. I'm like, I don't feel anything. What do I do? I am not good. For somebody who feels so much, I feel so much of what everybody else feels. I am not good at comforting people. I'm good at distracting you because I can feel when you're uncomfortable. So if I do something and you are less uncomfortable, I know that I'm doing something to help you because you don't feel that way anymore. But as far as just comforting you and just being that shoulder, if you're looking for a shoulder to cry on, don't come to me. partially, I don't know if it's just the brain thing in me or the fact that I have literally dealt with so much negative shit that I have created some kind of buffer. I don't know. Maybe it's some kind of mechanism in here to be like, it just didn't happen. A lot of times I think it's funny because we'll be watching these shows and all that and the true crime shows. And I'm like, huh. And I look at my husband, I'm like, you do realize that everything they just said that was wrong with that person, which is why they went off to be like this brutal, crazy serial killer. I have all that. That is me. I'm like, literally, I was like, I have all of those problems. And that's the part that I sometimes think is interesting because there's so many people out there that if I was in that situation, I don't know what I would do. I am also the person that I am very much so protective of like my zone. So if anybody was to ever attempt to get in my house, I will kill you first and ask questions later. On the other hand, I don't want to do that. I don't think you're going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak. So it just really gets crazy. But one thing I did want to make sure that I asked you about, I was looking at the little form here and I wanted to make a comment first. We talked about shadow stuff and I just wanted to ask a clarification question just to see if I'm on the right page. It's not shadow as in a shadow person, dark, it's always evil. It's more like the sun's out and you have a shadow. Regardless of whether or not you see it, it's there.
Yes.
And it follows you everywhere.
Yeah. So if we think of, and this is more of a traditional Jungian depth psychological type of framework of the psyche. So psyche is the Greek word for soul. And the idea is that we have this.
Really?
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? So if we think of the psyche having all of these working parts and it's got this communication between these parts, and within those parts, we have a level of consciousness called maybe the self. So within all of that, there's layers. And so briefly, just to go through real quick, we have the outer layer is the persona. This connects us to the outer world. The persona is like the skin that we wear. It's the clothing we wear, the way we dress, our personality, the traits, the characteristics, the things. Some we've chosen, some we've inherited, some we have unconsciously just decided are what we need to be in this world, right? Because there is this how we fit into society and what we do. Past the persona, we have the ego. And the ego is like the gatekeeper. It's a really powerful threshold. It's considered a complex. So it isn't a fixed structure. It's this energetic structure within us that we operate through. And they believe that within this energetic structure of the ego, deep within that is the self. So the ego is very protective for that reason. This is why we get triggered. This is why we have ideas and beliefs about things that are sometimes rigid, sometimes flexible. And so the deeper we get into the psyche, I'm going to skim through some of those layers because there are lots of them and lots of explanation around it. But right, just getting past the ego, this is our threshold of consciousness between what is seen and what is not seen. When we start to sink beneath what we can't see anymore, and that's because the ego allows us to see. I describe it to clients and students like a flashlight. If you're standing in a dark room and you turn on a flashlight, wherever you're pointing that flashlight, that's what you're going to see. You don't necessarily see the whole room. You just see what's in the line of focus. That's what our ego does for reality. It lets us see what is in the line of focus that we have decided is okay for us to see. The things that we've decided we don't like about ourselves, that we can't handle, that won't be accepted by society, we often will suppress and push down. The shadow is the part of us that holds it. It's a container in that sense. It's not acting against us or for us. It's not good or bad inherently. It's more of this containing space. But the beautiful thing about that is the shadow doesn't just hold all the parts of us that we can't stand, that we hate, that we don't like about ourselves. It also holds the parts of us that we haven't met yet. It holds parts of us that also are, let's say, more confident. It holds our ability to discover new skills, gifts, and talents that we haven't even recognized because they haven't come into view of the flashlight of that ego. So if we think about that, our impulses, our compulsions, our instinctual reactions, all of these things are very systematic and organized within the psyche, but they're beneath that threshold of what we can't see. So the shadow, we can't see it, we can't pin it down, but the way that we know the shadow is active is through an emotional charge. And when you mentioned you have certain triggers you're aware of, circumstances you'll stay out of now because you have wisdom, right? You've learned when these things are present, I don't like either how I feel, how I act, how I show up.
Yep.
Therefore, I'm going to turn my attention away, do something else. That's working on the shadow. We can't get rid of it. We're not meant to get rid of it. We can't integrate the shadow. There's a lot of people that do shadow work without really knowing what they're doing or saying. I try not to shame people for that, but it's more of an educational, just sharing that the shadow is really essential and you can't integrate it. So if somebody says, we're going to integrate your shadow, they don't really know what they're talking about. We can assimilate and integrate aspects within the shadow. Parts of things can come to consciousness.
So as far as not integrating, I almost wonder if their version of integrating the shadow is so like you said, say we'll go both directions. There's a gift that you have that you aren't aware of. You don't know how to hone it. Like my weird stuff. I know it's there, but I don't know shit about it. It's just floating. If you were to take it and pluck it from this bucket and work on it, bring it into the light as opposed to being in the shadow, maybe that's what they're considering integrating the shadow.
That's integration.
And then phobia. Say it's like a phobia.
Yeah.
And then you do that, what do they call it? Where it's like you're afraid of heights, they make you stand on the ladder.
Exposure therapy.
Yeah. Maybe that's something. I think a lot of people think of it as if it's in the shadow, it's like me. I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of what's in the dark.